Phone here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, thank you for coming today. We wanted to give you an update involving the homicide last night. This also involving the officer-involved shooting. Behind me to my left, Assistant Chief William Jackson. To my right, Major Linda Timms. To my far left is Captain Charles Bagsby. So the best thing for me to do is to give you guys roughly a timeline. That's probably the best way to give this because there was a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that happened last night, so that would probably be the appropriate way. This incident actually started roughly at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon involving the suspect, Zachary Hanna, in the 800 block of Bryant Street. There was an altercation between Hanna, his ex-girlfriend, and several other individuals where Hanna, armed with a shotgun, shot into an occupied vehicle. He fled the scene. The police were not called at that time. The police had no knowledge of that incident when that occurred. At roughly 6:46 p.m. yesterday afternoon, Bryant then went back to the 800 block of Bryant Street, and when he did so, got into an altercation with the same female and another individual where he tried to shoot the female, was unsuccessful. He then turned the weapon on another individual where he subsequently shot and killed that victim. That victim died as a result of his injuries on the scene. That call came in through 911. When officers arrived, Mr. Hanna had already fled the situation or that area, armed with a shotgun, and he fled into the nearby wooded area at Glen Acres Drive. Officers set up a perimeter to try to secure the subject. The subject was in the wooded area, and roughly at around 9:27 last night, a supervisor with the Mobile Police Department Patrol Division seen the subject in the 800 block of Airport Street. When he seen the subject, he yelled for the subject to surrender. The subject fired a round from the shotgun and again fled in the wooded area. Sometimes later, around 10:27, two patrol officers ran into Mr. Hanna in the 900 block of Carroll Street. When they seen the subject, he exited from the wooded area armed with a shotgun. They gave him commands to drop the weapon, at which time Mr. Hanna and the officers engaged in gunfire. Unfortunately, one of our officers was shot about the lower portion of both the right and the left leg. He was subsequently transported to the hospital where he was treated and released, and I am pleased to tell you he is at home today resting with his family. However, Mr. Hanna again retreated back into the wooded area, and around 10:31 last night in the 900 block of Glen Acres Drive, he ran into an innocent bystander in the backyard of that bystander's yard, where he pointed the weapon at that bystander. The bystander was able to talk him away. Mr. Hanna then again fled into the wooded area. Around 10:48 last night, additional officers encountered in the 8000 block of Crowell Street ran into Mr. Hanna again, gave him several warnings to drop the weapon, the shotgun, at which both the officers and Mr. Hanna got into a gunfight. K9 was deployed at that point because we believed that Hanna was struck by gunfire, and K9 was deployed to assist with the apprehension. Mr. Hanna has since been transported to University Hospital, where he's being treated for several gunshot wounds, to include some wounds that he suffered as a result of canine bites. Currently, Mr. Hanna is in serious stabilized condition, and as a result of all that he was involved in right now, he will be charged with 1 count of murder, for that of Mr. Matthew Richardson, 31 years of age, 7 counts of attempted murder, 6 of those involving a police officer, shooting into an occupied vehicle, causing physical harm of a police animal, menacing and attempting to elude police. With that said, that's about the best timeline, approximate timeline that I can give you as a result. With that said, I'll open it up for questions.
Your officer was wounded in the legs. Apparently, that was pretty lucky because I assume that was buckshot, right? That was a shotgun.
Right. So as of right now, we've determined that particular incident involved buckshot, and I think we're pretty fortunate that he was only struck in the legs.
A little higher.
Sure.
And I noticed that there was an attack on a police dog. How badly was that dog injured or wasn't?
Yeah, so the dog was injured. You know, to what extent he'll survive his injuries, but nonetheless, we believe it was an intentional act to hurt the dog.
Have you any idea what this all started over? It doesn't even matter.
Well, so far what we know is it's domestic related. You know, this is involving, from my understanding, an ex-girlfriend from the onstart of this situation, from when it started yesterday afternoon at 3 o'clock at the same address where the homicide occurred. But to what extent and why it happened, I'm not sure. All that is a part of the investigation. And as the updates become available, we'll be able to give you a little bit more as time goes on.
Where was the victim shot? Matthew Richardson, where was he shot?
So are you talking about the victim?
Yes, the victim.
So that part's under investigation. Of course, you know, the police department wants to offer its condolences, certainly, to the family of Mr. Richardson, and we would like to be able to have some conversation with the victim as regards to the injuries. Obviously, they were significant. Yeah, it's a great question. December of 2021, Hannah was arrested for unlawful possession of drug paraphernalia, and in, I believe it was February of this year, he was arrested for the same charge as well as an additional charge of resisting arrest. And I do not have the disposition of those court cases right now, or even if he went to court on them.
Was a victim, Matthew Richardson, was he related to the ex-girlfriend Hannah was trying to shoot at? Yeah,
to what extent at this time I'm not really sure, but we do believe that the victim and the female involved were related.
You've had it in the span of 8 days. You've had, actually, 7 days, a week, you've had police officers put at risk and now injured. That's kind of unusual for this town here to have that much violence actually performed on its police force. So just wonder about your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I think it just it just solidifies the thought process of how dangerous the job is, not just locally for Mobile's finest, but certainly for every law enforcement agency across the country that are facing this. You know, people do desperate things in desperate situations. This investigation ultimately, hopefully, will determine why Mr. Hanna did and took the steps he did and took the actions that he took. But so far as to right now, it appears to stem from a domestic or intimate relationship, at least from Mr. Hanna and the female that was involved.
Did the female suffer any injuries then?
That part's under investigation. In terms of being shot, she was not.
Release officer's name?
Yeah, so we will be releasing that at some point, hopefully today. But let me, there's a few more things that we want to get accomplished before we release the officer's name.
How many officers were involved in the shooting?
So we had a lot of officers involved. We had a total of 4 officers, I believe, that engaged in gunfire with Mr. Hanna. But there were several more officers there, to include K-9 officers, which is why you have 6 counts of attempted murder.
Do you have any more details about the encounter of the property owner? Because that, to me, pretty dramatic moments that could have gone either way there. Luckily, he managed to talk him down. Do you have any more details beyond that?
Well, you know, that's the situation. If you know the Glen Acres community, it's a wooded area, but it's also an area where, you know, this innocent bystander, not involved at all in any way, you know, is armed or is confronted with an armed adversary. There were conversations. To what extent, I'm not sure, but we do know that Hannah pointed the shotgun at this victim at least twice, putting this civilian in fear of his life. So we were fortunate that we did not have another homicide in that regard. But it is sobering to think that you could walk out your back door and have this encounter with a person that is not supposed to be there. Unbeknownst to this civilian, this victim, if you will, the person that he encountered had just, within a few hours, killed someone, unfortunately.
Did he have any idea what was going on? Was it a chance encounter, or was he saying, hey, something weird's going on out here, I'm going to go fix it? Yeah,
that's the part that the investigators will get into. As you can imagine, we had a huge crime scene in the Glen Acres community, I believe, that ranged anywhere from Airport Street over to Glen Acres Drive and the two streets in between. So it's a large crime scene. Witnesses have to be spoken to. Evidence has to be collected, certainly when you're involved in this many officers, a victim of a homicide, and certainly the suspect who survived his injuries who are being treated. So we've got all of our able investigators out there doing what they're supposed to do. We just wanted to make sure that we updated the public as best we can to the circumstances.
The suspect came randomly to that guy's backyard, and he know the guy didn't know.
Right. So all we know is that the suspect was fleeing from police. You know, as I told you, over several hours, Hannah had ran into multiple officers, and the 3 times we do know that Hannah fired at least once during each encounter with the officers.
How long process? Was there kind of a process or anything while all that was going on to kind of alert people in the area that Hannah was running around different areas?
Yeah, so to what extent the community was notified, I'm not sure. I do know that the media was out there. To what extent they put that information out, I'm not sure.
And how long are the officers involved in any investigation?
So our normal protocol is they'll be on administrative leave for at least 3 days. Certainly the officer that was injured, his injuries and the healing of those injuries will dictate when he comes back. But there's a process to that, and I think it's important too for the community to know there'll be a 2-part investigation. One would be an administrative investigation to make sure that our officers followed protocol according to the rules and regulations and the law. But the other one will be the criminal investigation, which will ultimately be turned over to the district attorney's office here in Mobile County.
But you said earlier that the suspect, Hannah, he had canine bites and gunshot was approximately how many wounds he had on his body? Yeah, well, as far as wounds, I'm not sure. We do know that he was struck at least 3 times from gunfire, but we do believe he's going to survive his injuries, or at least at this time. All right, thank you. Have a good day.